Several weeks ago, I finished up a book that I actually started a couple years ago, which is crazy. It took me that long to actually get through it, but I finished it and I wanted to talk about it, both to give a proper review of it, but also to mention something that might help you if you desire to read this book as well. So today we're going to be talking about Letters of Samuel Rutherford. This is edited and with a biographical sketch and introduction by Andrew Boner. We'll dive more into that momentarily. But this is a 709-page book. It's 744 pages with a glossary, an appendix, and an index. And before we move on to anything else, I want to talk about the quality of this book. Now, since I purchased this book 2 years ago, they have put out another edition, so everything I say here is talking about this edition. I'm not sure what the newer edition is like, but I wanted to mention this because this is quite possibly the highest quality book that is on my shelves back here. Even though it's the same as everything else the Banner of Truth puts out, it's cloth-bound, it's Smith-sewn, it's printed in the USA by Versa Press. For whatever reason, this particular volume is just outstanding. I wanted to mention the pages are smooth as silk. They are just fantastic. The paper is extremely high quality. It is just amazing. The color of the book is very nice. It's this nice bright red with gold lettering. The binding is loose enough that you can basically open the book anywhere without any kind of closing, so it's just a really well-bound book. It just feels good in the hands, and it looks very nice. So if that means anything to you, there is that to go on as well. So first, before we dive into the book review proper, I'm going to give some information about the author. Of course, I'm not going to give too much information because there's an entire biographical sketch in the book if you'd like to know more about him. But he was born somewhere between 1600 and 1661, or I'm sorry, 1660 and 1661. We're not sure which because they didn't keep dates like that all the way back then. But he was born in Nisbet, Roxburghshire, Scotland, and he received his education from the University of Edinburgh. He is, of course, one of the most well-known members of the Westminster Assembly today, and in 1636, he was arrested for being a non-conformist, and it was in prison that he wrote most of the letters contained in this volume. Spurgeon said of him that his writings were the nearest thing to inspired scripture without being scripture written by men. Paraphrased, of course. He is the best known for his book Lex Rex, but his letters are a close second. Rutherford was a Scottish Presbyterian theologian, minister, author. He was married twice and had a number of children who all died before him. It was also said that he was a dear friend of James Guthrie, who is a friend of Robert Traill's father, and we've reviewed Traill's works here on the channel, so just making a little connection there. Before we go any further, if you're new, welcome to Petra Publications. My name is Davis, and here on the channel, basically, I just review Reformed Christian books, though sometimes I do step out of that category and may even review a book that is not even Christian if I found it edifying and would like to share that with you. I'd love to have you join us, so subscribe if you like that kind of content. If you've been following for a while, the links to my Patreon and PayPal are in the description down below. Thank you so much for your support. Okay, so let's go ahead and dive into the book review proper. As I mentioned earlier, Andrew Boner edited this particular print of it, and Banner of Truth also publishes his diary and life, which hopefully eventually I'm going to review this on the channel. I read that a few years ago as well. That's one that I actually finished a few years ago, though. So anyway, this particular edition has a couple things that I wanted to mention before we dive into the contents of the book. And the first thing is that there are multiple ways to read this book, and I'm going to recommend one to you in this video. As I mentioned earlier, I took almost 2 years to read this. I don't recommend that. Please don't do that. The reason that happened, though, is because I tried to read it in one sitting almost. It was a kind of reading 15, 20 pages in letters in a sitting. And that really doesn't work that well. Come to find out that it's actually much easier if you read one letter a day, and Boner actually went through and edited, and there's 365, which I'm not sure if that's providence or if that was purposeful, but in either case, there's 365 letters, so you can read one every day, whether you get up in the morning or you go to bed at night. You can read it then. I guess you do both of those, but you can read it before or after that, and so it works really well that way, and I highly recommend you read it that way and not the way I tried to read it. If you do that, it makes so much more sense, and the quality of reading which I was able to do for this book was nowhere near as high as I like it to be, and as much as it is in other books that I've reviewed here on the channel. So probably at some point I need to reread the book and do it one letter a day for a year. So just mentioning that makes it much easier to read. Probably the quality of reading will go much higher that way as well. So these things I'm about to mention, I'm pretty sure, are what Andrew Boner added to this edition, unlike the editions previous to that. And there are 6 things that I wanted to mention here. And so the first thing is he mentioned who the letter was written to and important information about the recipient. So in each letter, there's a heading before in a very small print that gives information about who that person is. If it's an important person in history, if it's an important person in the society at that time, it gives who they were and information about them, and then it also gives how they were connected, most likely. Some people he wasn't able to figure out who they were. Most of them they were, and it just gives very helpful context. Instead of just reading a random letter, you know exactly who the recipient was, and that's extremely helpful. Number 2, main points of interest within the letter. In each letter, 365 times, Andrew Boner went through and read each letter and summarized it within a sentence, giving the main points. So if you're looking for a specific letter, you'll be able to find it much faster than if you had to read through all of the letters to find it. You can read the sentence prior to the letter that gives the main points. Very helpful. Number 3, corrections, further information, and cross-referencing in footnotes. So he cross-references previous letters, future letters, so that they're all concise, they're in one place. Again, you don't have to go scrambling around trying to find it. He's done it for you. If there was a typo, or I guess they wouldn't be typo, they'd be handos in Rutherford's work, Boner went back and fixed it for him. All kinds of different things that way. Dates that were corrected, names that were misspelled, et cetera, et cetera. So very helpful things there as well. Number 4, they are arranged chronologically, letters arranged chronologically, and they weren't in previous editions, so Boner went through and edited that so that they were all in chronological order. It's much more concise. It's easier to follow Rutherford's train of thought and the things he was dealing with in his life at that time, whether he was in prison, whether he was free, and how he was responding to those things as he was reaching out to hundreds of people. Number 5, a sketch of Samuel Rutherford's life at the beginning. I mentioned that earlier. A very helpful little sketch. I think it's 60 pages or so, so it's not too short, but it's also not too long. It gives just the right amount of information to understand who Rutherford was contextually, and also from the perspective of his life, where he was coming from, and his different views and responses to controversies of the time. Very helpful. And lastly, this book also includes occasional inserts of plates, or pictures as we would know them today, but original plates from, I'm assuming, Boner's edition, but I'm not entirely sure. But those are scattered throughout. Many are found in the biographical sketch, but they're also found throughout the letters. If the recipient of the letter was a prominent figure in society, perhaps they had a large estate, images of those estates are in the book, which is very cool. And honestly, I can sit and look at a hand-sketched plate for hours. The detail of those things never ceases to amaze me. So those are also very cool. Outside of Andrew Boner, there's also a very helpful glossary in the back. Of course, this is written in Old English. It was in the 1600s, so there are a lot of words that are difficult to understand. Glossary, of course, answers all of those things. Just flip back there. It's all alphabetically ordered, so you can know exactly what a very difficult word means. Fairly in-depth table of contents in the back. Of course, I mentioned that earlier. But it gives a lot of the names, a lot of the places, some topical things, but not so many of those. So yeah, that is pretty much the cool things about this book, if you will. And now I'm just going to read the table of contents, which is not very much here because I'm not going to read 360 letters. So it starts out, as I've mentioned multiple times now, with a sketch of Rutherford. And there's a preface in the beginning, which is by, I'm assuming, let's see here. It doesn't say who it's by. I'll assume it's Boner again. Correct me if I'm wrong. And then it has an index of chief places and individuals referred to, index of special subjects. So I missed that. So there actually is a subjects index. And then a glossary. And then additions of letters Rutherford's letters, which is really cool. It's an appendix in the back. Man, I'm having trouble speaking today. So it gives every edition up until this one in the back. Let me see if I can find that. I'll show it to you real quick. So here is the list of editions. Pretty cool. Sample of the old orthography, or orthography. I don't know. See if I can find that as well. Sorry, I should have put bookmarks in here. That's on page 740. And there's that as well. And then it also has the last words in a poem by Mrs. Cousin on page 741. So this is going to be a rather long review, but it's a book that deserves it nonetheless. So at this point in the review, typically I would answer the question, are there any better books on the topic? However, this whole shelf back here is full of letters, and if you've read multiple books of letters, you know that they're all entirely different, and I don't think it's fair to compare them in that way. So I'm going to not answer that question. It's kind of not applicable at this point. But would I buy it? Yes, I would. This is a standard Christian book. It is one that every Christian should have on their shelf. Especially given the caveat that I mentioned earlier about how to read the book. I think that is necessary, almost needful for reading the book. It definitely will improve the reading experience. So with all that said, now I wanted to read some quotes from the book that I pulled out as I read it. And of course there are many, many other quotes, and I may not even get through all of these. We've been going for quite some time now. But I just wanted to read a couple quotes. The first couple come from the sketch of Rutherford. First one is from page 5. It says, this is someone's account of him. He never fails to be found at the sick beds of the people. Men said of him, he is always praying, always preaching, always visiting the sick, always catechizing, always writing, and always studying. That's the pastor you want right there. And then on page 21, it says, this is him exhorting some of his fellow pastors. It says, "Dear brethren, do all for him. Pray for Christ. Preach for Christ. Do all for Christ. Beware of men-pleasing. The chief shepherd will shortly appear." And he often called Christ his kingly king. So good. So now we'll dive into some quotes from the actual letters. On page 151, let's see here. There we go. He's writing to, let's see, where is this? It doesn't have a name, but a lady, Viscountess of Kinmer. It says, "Ye must go in at heaven's gates, and your book in your hand, still learning." And as is clear, I am not exactly a learned man, so I am continuing to read as exhorted by Rutherford here. Until I go into heaven, I shall continue studying. Page 199, he says, Keep yourself in the love of Christ, and stand far back from the pollutions of the world. Side not with these times, and hold off from coming nigh the signs of a conspiracy with those that are now come out against Christ, that ye may be one kept for Christ only. Amen to that. Page 249, he says, Sir, I recommend unto you the thoughts of death, and how ye will wish your soul to be when ye shall die, or shall lie cold, blue, ill-smelling clay. That reminds me greatly of Jonathan Edwards saying, think often of my own death, right? I forget which number that is. I'll probably put that in the video. But at any rate, very similar way of thinking there, and it's so good. So, a lot of people I think would say it's morbid, but I think it's a very biblical idea to think of your own death. How would you like your soul to appear when you're dead? Let's see here. Page 271, he says, Satan hath a friend at court in the heart of youth, and there pride, luxury, lust, revenge, forgetfulness of God, and are hired as agents. All of those things. I think a lot of times the youth of the church today don't realize how much Satan is attacking them and how vulnerable they are to those attacks. Just two more, actually. I have one on page 278. I desire you to correct and curb banning, swearing, lying, drinking, Sabbath breaking, and idle spending of the Lord's day, in absence from the kirk, as far as your authority reacheth in that parish. Another great exhortation by Rutherford. And then one final quote, and there were many others, but this review is going rather long, so I'll not let that happen. Page 293, Boner coined this section here as Directions for Christian Conduct, and he's writing to John Fleming, and essentially, he gives, let's see, how many was this? 11 exhortations for Christian living. And I don't have time to read the whole paragraph of each of these points, but I may be able to read the first sentence of each of these, just to give an idea. This is really great stuff. He says, number 1, that hours of the day, less or more time for the word and prayer be given to God, not sparing that 12th hour or midday, howbeit should then be the shorter time. Number 2, in the midst of worldly employments there should be some thoughts of sin, death, judgment, and eternity, with at least a word or two of ejaculatory prayer to God. Number 3, to beware of wandering of heart in private prayers. 4, not to grudge, howbeit ye come from prayer without sense of joy. Number 5, that the Lord's day from morning to night be spent always either in private or public worship. Number 6, that words be observed, wandering and idle thoughts be avoided, sudden anger and desire of revenge, even of such as persecute the truth, be guarded against. Number 7, that known, discovered, and revealed sins that are against the conscience be eschewed as most dangerous preparatives to hardness of heart. Number 8, that in dealing with men, faith and truth in covenants and trafficking, Old English, be regarded that we deal with all men in sincerity. Number 9, I have been much challenged, number 1, for not referring all to God at the last end. Oh, wait, this is way too many here. So many of these. So this is another 16 of these things that he's been challenged with. So I believe I will stop there, but you get the idea. These wonderful biblical truths and principles, perhaps not explicitly mentioned in the Bible, but very, very important to the Christian life, all of them on that list. And there were dozens and dozens of more quotes that I had considered adding to this list, but I guess I've been going for almost 20 minutes now, or over 20 minutes, so I probably should stop here. But I hope this review was helpful to you, and if it was, please leave a comment down below. I always love hearing from you. Thank you so much for watching to the end of the video, and Lord willing, I will see you again very soon. God bless.